Nigel Farage, the leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party and the outgoing co-chair of the Independence and Democracy Group here in the European Parliament. You've done pretty well in these elections. You must be pretty pleased.
Yes, I think for a party like UKIP to come second nationally and to beat the governing Labour Party and the Lib Dems again, as we did 5 years ago, is a very pleasing result, especially as there was a whole mass of EU-critical parties standing. You know, Arthur Scargill, Bob Crow's No to EU. There were all sorts of parties out there on that ticket with a big fragmentation of the vote. And so in the face of that, I think, and given that we really didn't discuss the European issue as much as I would have liked, I think in the face of that, it was a hell of an achievement to do what we did, yeah.
I mean, wasn't one of the problems here that there was very little discussion of the EU? The whole election seemed to be based around the expenses scandal back at Westminster.
Yes, well, it was. Expenses dominated the British agenda, and across the rest of Europe, all anybody was viewing these elections as was a warm-up for subsequent general elections. So it's sad, actually, because one of my complaints about national politics in Westminster is that here is this great issue of where 75% of our laws are made, and whether you agree with that or not, it is an important question, and yet it suits the Conservatives and it suits the Labour and the Lib Dems to brush that under the carpet. And you would have thought once every 5 years, with the European election, and in the absence of a referendum, we might have had a national debate, but it simply hasn't happened.
Given the growing Euroscepticism of the Conservative Party in the UK, in a sense, are you not duplicating their policies?
Well, the growing Euroscepticism of the Conservative Party is amongst their members, activists and donors and local councillors. It's not reflected in their leadership. I mean, look, the only thing that Cameron is doing that is vaguely Eurosceptic is to attempt not to sit with the EPP and to sit somewhere different. Look at all the other policies and you'll find actually he's backtracked on the policies that Michael Howard had. For example, the Conservatives talked about unilaterally withdrawing from the Common Fisheries Policy and taking back territorial waters. Cameron's revoked that. So in reality, the Conservative base may be Eurosceptic, but the Conservative leadership really isn't.
A lot of Eurosceptic people have been elected this time around. I mean, we've got something like 93 in the non-inscrits at the moment, the unattached. That includes, obviously, the Conservatives at the moment, because they haven't decided where they'll go. A lot of people haven't decided where they'll go. There are other parties, though, that have been elected that you're less happy with.
Yeah, I mean, the far right have advanced. I mean, one of the common themes of this election is, UKIP accepted, moderate Eurosceptics have done pretty badly across Europe, particularly in the old countries, the ones that have been around for a few years. And there is a growth of the far right, and we've seen that in Britain with the British National Party getting elected. And, I'm extremely unhappy about that, but at the same time not surprised. You know, in the last 5 years, we had a French, Dutch and Irish referendum in which people clearly said no to a constitutional treaty, and what's happened? They've been ignored, and the EU is going on implementing the treaty as we speak. You know, people get to a point where they get so frustrated, where they feel their voice isn't being heard, that they do move towards the extremes.
Because some of these parties that have been elected, I mean, they're not all of the real extreme right, but some did actually campaign on anti-Roma tickets, stirring up hate, if you like, and also at least one party has a military wing that wears black shirts. I mean, you're an expert on the First World War. I mean, that's a worrying sign, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very worrying. I mean, we've seen it all before, and people thought it was all dead and buried years ago, but it's back to my question. It's back to consent. You cannot build a United States of Europe. You can't do it without the consent of the European peoples. And what is clear is that it's now being done in defiance of consent, because when they have referendums, people don't say, carry on chaps, we're happy with it.
Now, the UK Independence Party was obviously part of the Independence and Democracy Group in DEM. You were the co-chair of that group. Yeah. Some of the parties that seem to be expressing an interest in joining it this time are the sort of people you may not want to be associated with. I mean, what's happening there?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, nobody really in this Parliament wants to sit in a non-inscrit. You know, you sit in the unattached group. It's a pretty funny old mixture of people, and it doesn't really give you the opportunity in terms of speaking time in the big debates and all the rest of it. So it's not a great place to be. So everybody would like to be a member of some family in this Parliament. It's a difficult call to say how this will all shake down. All sorts of people are coming to us. I will meet people. I will talk to people. I will try and form a sensible judgment on who we find acceptable and who we don't find acceptable.
Do you feel you're going to be, in a sense, in competition with the Conservatives in trying to attract parties with a slightly or even more greatly Eurosceptic view of the whole European project?
Yeah, I think there is an element of competition between us and the Conservatives on this, and may the best man win.
Mr Cameron has said that he would like to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and he's promised that if he gets elected.
Well,
is he going to stick to that?
Well, hang on a second. Hang on a second. I mean, this is what annoys me. If we'd had this debate in the last 3 weeks in Britain, I confidently predict UKIP would have done better than it did. You know, a lot of people I met on the street said, well, we're going to vote Tory this time, Nigel, because Cameron's promised us a referendum. And it was an entirely fraudulent promise, because what he wasn't saying is he'll only give people a referendum after the next general election if the treaty hasn't been ratified. So what he's saying is that if the Irish vote no for a second time, the British can have a say, but if the Irish vote yes in the second referendum, we can't have a say.
We'll deal with the rest of Europe shortly, but looking again at the UK, I mean, there's no doubt the expenses scandal was one of the big things. It caused the total collapse of the Labour vote. In fact, most of the other parties that have done well didn't actually increase their vote. In most cases, it went down, but the Labour vote collapsed. Isn't there an irony to this that UKIP has done so well out of it when you've had your problems too? Let's be honest about this. One member who was kicked out of your group and subsequently spent time in prison, another one who's accused of other things.
Yeah, well, when we get bad eggs, we boot them out. And if the Labour and Conservative parties had done that, there wouldn't be many left sitting on the Westminster benches at the moment. So I do feel, on the expenses question, that yes, we've had our problems, but we have actually dealt with it rather ruthlessly and very quickly, and thank goodness we did. I think the analysis, the press analysis of the expenses scandal and its impact on the European elections is wrong. It's as if, because of the expenses scandal, people are disenchanted with politics, therefore they're voting differently. Baloney. This is just a symptom of something that has been growing over years, a feeling of utter disenchantment with professional career politicians, a feeling of helplessness, that when you look at the manifestos of a Labour and Conservative party at a general election, that frankly, on big ideological principles, you frankly can't put a cigarette paper between them, a feeling that people aren't being represented, and a feeling their voice isn't being heard. So the expenses scandal just accelerated a trend that was there already. I think there were some old Labour people that did come to UKIP, bypassing the BNP, interestingly, and it was the expenses thing that finally pushed them towards us. But they actually voted for UKIP because of what we stand for.
You are concerned about immigration. I mean, it was obviously an issue. It did undoubtedly influence voters to vote, perhaps in some cases, for the BNP and other far-right parties across Europe. Now, you, at the age of 16, actually witnessed the Brixton riots in 1981 in London. How big an influence did that have, and what did it persuade you to believe?
I think the sus laws, and I think the way the Metropolitan Police carried out those sus laws was provocative and was wrong, and convinces me today that if we were forced to carry ID cards, that similarly there would be different groups and minorities who would feel that they'd been prejudiced against. I think we've made some huge mistakes by promoting multiculturalism, i.e. encouraging people to stay within their own groups and not to integrate. And I think that the European dimension on this really has been the straw, frankly, that's breaking the camel's back of public opinion, that to say to the whole of Poland and Lithuania and Bulgaria and Romania and possibly Turkey in a few years to come, as many millions of you that want to walk through the door can, is a wholly irresponsible policy. And I think that what's happened with East European migration into Britain, it's left every market town and every city in Britain feeling a less happy place than it was 5 years ago. And I say all of these things to you as the leader of a party that is proud to have had 5 black and Asian candidates amongst our 69 candidates for the European election. We are utterly non-racist and non-sectarian in how we're doing this, but I would much prefer Britain's immigration policy not to be an open door, but to do it the way the Australians do it.
Nigel, just finally, we're going to have a number of these very right-wing parties, quite apart from Eurosceptic parties, within the European Parliament. What effect do you think they're likely to have on the way the Parliament runs over the next 5 years? Because they are undoubtedly going to change the attitude to policy and the way things are done.
Well, I've watched it. I mean, I've been here 10 years. I'm a veteran now. And I've watched Mussolini's granddaughter, and I've watched Jean-Marie Le Pen and various other figures. and they get up and scream and shout occasionally. They've been totally ineffective. They've never managed to master the rules of the Parliament. They never really get engaged with any of the issues. They don't have contributions to make in debates that make people stop and think, wow, perhaps they're saying something sensible. I think it's been the moderate Eurosceptics, I think it's been the Independence and Democracy Group, to some extent myself, that have caused far more problems for this Parliament and far more problems for the European Commission and their commissioners than the far-right group here has done in the past or ever will do.
And I'm sure you'll continue to create problems for them in the future.
That is my intention.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much indeed.